Ready? We're going to go ahead. Good afternoon. It is, what is it, January the 9th? Probably. January the 9th in the afternoon. This is the House Judiciary Committee. And as you can tell, members of the committee, we are being closed captioned so that people can understand what I'm saying all the way across the room and across the state, apparently. So that's fun. Today we're having a briefing from the Maryland State Police about the gun center, and so I could ask everybody who's going to speak to come on up. We'll bring you up to the table, and we'll get started. 2 years ago, this committee addressed issues related to the Bruin decision of the Supreme Court, which resulted in a large number of applications for, you can have a seat, please. Sorry. Thank you very much. It resulted in a large number of applications for concealed carry permits to be submitted to the Maryland State Police. The gun center works on those applications and also provides a lot of information to other law enforcement agencies, to state's attorney's offices. And so it was helpful 2 years ago when we had this briefing with them, and I thought it would be helpful again to have you come back, give us a little more insight as to what's gone on now in the wake of Bruin 2 years later, but also talk about the work of the gun center generally, and I know you have a presentation to show us as well. And so with that, being that I've talked long enough and I think that everybody's got what they need to make sure that the PowerPoint presentation, there we go, is working. Whoever would like to begin, please go ahead, introduce yourself to the committee.
Okay. Chair Clippinger, Vice Chair Bartlett, and committee members. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Rosemary Chappell of the Criminal Investigation Bureau. I have with me today command staff from 2 of our critical units, the Maryland Gun Center and the Licensing Division. And we're pleased to be here today to present for you. The members of this leadership team are a wealth of expertise in their respective areas, and they're going to share with you insight into their division's operations. They'll answer any questions that you may have, and we look forward to servicing you all. You're going to first hear from the commander of the Licensing Division. It's going to be I think we're starting with the Gun Center. I apologize. You're going to hear from the Assistant Commander of the Gun Center, Detective Sergeant Mike Sauer, and then you're going to hear from the Commander of the Licensing Division, Captain Andrew Rosignol. Again, thank you for having us here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Detective Sergeant Michael Sauer with the Maryland State Police, the Assistant Commander for the Maryland Gun Center. Okay, there we go. Today we're going to give a presentation about the Maryland Gun Center and some of the things that we do and what we provide to the citizens and the law enforcement here within the state of Maryland. On the next slide, you'll see the missions and the goal. The Maryland Gun Center is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week operation that is here to support all law enforcement within the state, to vet and screen firearm-related cases and investigations, which really just help hold the gun offenders accountable for the gun crimes that they commit. For the command staff for the Maryland Gun Center, the division commander is Captain Gary Mounts. The region commander is Lieutenant Jeffrey Jones, and myself, Michael Sauer, is the assistant commander for the Gun Center. Some of the things that that have been mandated by the Gun Center. Back in October 1st of 2022, the Maryland Gun Center was regulated into law that what used to be a voluntary service to all law enforcement departments within the state now became mandatory for them to use our service and provide that arrest information and data to the Gun Center. Another piece of legislation that passed in October 1 of 2023 was expanding the responsibility to the Gun Center to be notified of any firearms that are seized in connection to a final protective order service by any law enforcement that operate within the state of Maryland. Some of the cases that we handle at the Gun Center on the left-hand side, our main focus has always been the live arrest, the officers out on the street that are making the traffic stops, executing search and seizures warrants that could be from handgun to vehicle, handgun to person, all the way to a strong arm robbery or shooting investigation. Some of the other services that we provide to all law enforcement is we conduct firearm registration, firearm returns, where we then take that person's information. We go through the same battery of background investigation and checks to determine if somebody is prohibited and allowed to possess firearms, or if they're disqualified possessing firearms. It really helps that we're not returning firearms to that person that may be prohibited. Other services that we provide are firearm registration verification, handgun permit validation, and we also handle disapprovals of false applications that we receive from the Maryland State Police License Division. Another thing we do is also provide mental health checks for firearm-related incidents throughout the state that require so. For a gun center investigator to be able to determine somebody's status for being in possession of a firearm, we go through about 15 different databases, and you'll see a few of them listed out on the screen there. But it's the same battery that we conduct here at the Maryland Gun Center that also is when you try to purchase a firearm that the Captain Rosendale will speak on a little bit later. On the next slide, you'll see for 2024, these are the some of the top categories that we kind of captured for the types of incidents and arrests that officers are making out on the street. Going over from the left to the right, we start with handgun and vehicle violations. Then our second highest is handgun on person, search and seizure warrants, firearms used in the commission of crime, police investigations, firearms investigations, and then persons that are just caught in possession of ammo in itself without a firearm. And if we need to go back to any of these slides for any questions, please let us know. We can do so. The next slide is just a capture of the types of cases that we're receiving from all the counties within the state. These are all the live arrests that are occurring to search and seizures warrants. These numbers don't reflect any registration requests. We track those separately, but you'll see in our total cases here on the next slide. But it kind of gives you a gauge on where the most populated areas of gun crimes and these things are occurring without the state. The next slide we have here is just a little glimpse into some of the departments that use our services, being within the top 5, Baltimore County PD, the Maryland State Police, Baltimore City PD, PG County, and Anne Arundel County. And as you'll see within the graph, they're just kind of indicating the number of types of cases that they're involving. When you look back between this slide and the previous slide, you'll notice that some numbers are higher for Baltimore County than Baltimore City. That's because on this slide right here, this is including that registration check that we also track as well. Registration checks occur for many different reasons, anywhere from search and seizure warrants being pre-executed, protective order services, ERPOs, that the officers and investigators want to know if there's any firearms registered to an individual before making contact. On the next slide, these are just the number of charges that the Maryland State Police Gun Center has recommended for 2024, where we're almost at 30,000 recommended charges throughout the state. And they're kind of breaking down into month categories on how they're generated. On the next slide, we're just looking at Baltimore City PD. Just chose Baltimore City PD just because it is the largest metropolitan city in the state that operates with almost 600,000 people according to the 2020 census. Within Baltimore City alone, we're looking at almost 11,000 cases where we're recommending charges. Almost 11,000 charges being recommended for cases throughout Baltimore City, which that's accounting for about a third of the total charges that we recommend as a whole. And that's everything I have for a slideshow. Feel free to ask any questions that I can answer for you.
Why don't we do that and we'll go down. Sound like a confident.
Yes. Thank you all for being here and for your commitment to public service. Happy New Year. My question is, since during the interim when the legislative session was not in session, the Supreme Court of the United States handed down the decision in the Rami case, R-A-M-I, which means that if someone has been convicted of, I believe, domestic violence offenses you can seize their guns. That is not an infringement on the Second Amendment. And so I was just wondering how the decision in the Rami case has impacted your work. Are you seeing more seizures? I was just very curious because I would think that would be a bit of a game changer for you all.
Well, as far as being in possession of it, it's just adding another layer to what would prohibit somebody from possessing of firearms. Maryland has already had such things. If someone is convicted of an assault second degree or assault first degree, they would be prohibited alone based off of that. Other legislation that has passed is persons that receive a probation before judgment on a crime that is domestically related, that would also prohibit somebody from possessing firearms within the state of Maryland for any type of criminal arrest.
So you're saying that, in layman's terms, that it hasn't had much of an impact. Is that correct? And also my other follow-up is you talked about mental health checks. Do those occur when Johnny calls and says, I'm suicidal, so you go and make sure that Johnny's not near a gun, or what did you mean by mental health checks?
So the gun center wouldn't necessarily handle that. That would be from the officers out on the street. We would do a mental health check if a firearm were seized or located on that type of incident. So in the case of somebody calls and requests that they're having mental health issues and a firearm is believed to be in the possession of that person, they would contact the gun center, and then we would do the full battery of background investigations on that particular case, looking at their criminal history as well as their mental health checks that we do to determine if they're in the MDEH system.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no further questions. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Delegate Simmons.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here today. Just want to go over 3 of the bullet points here and just get you to explain out what it means. You have firearms used in a crime, 578, 79. Then you have handguns in vehicles, and then handguns on persons. Can you just elaborate a little bit about those 3?
So the firearms used in the commission of a crime would be somebody that did an assault by pointing, or they committed a second degree assault with that firearm, whereas that like a handgun in a vehicle and handgun on a person would be, the handgun in a vehicle is typically a officer does a traffic stop, locate a firearm within the vehicle or on that person's person sometime during the course of that traffic stop. The handgun on persons normally occur outside the vehicle scenarios where officers can be dispatched to any type of disorderly kind of situation or drug investigation or some sort, that they're just locating that firearm on that particular person's body.
Follow up, Mayor. Do you see an increase in these numbers when it comes to Maryland streets, as far as uptake in these type of possessions?
We haven't seen much of an increase, more than a small marginal part, but nothing has significantly increased one way or another.
Thank you.
Would that be if a person has a domestic problem, or could they have another charge where they received the PBJ and that would put them in violation for having a handgun?
So the probation before judgment statute is if a subject is arrested and charged for a crime, whatever that crime may be, if the judge in the case determines that was a domestically related case, that would then prohibit that person from possessing firearms for the course of their time.
Domestic, then that wouldn't.
Yeah, that would just be what the underlying crime would be.
Thank you very much.
Delegate Phillips.
Is there, and these statistics don't necessarily point this out, but I've got a question with regard to prohibited locations for carrying guns. Has there been any indication of uptick in enforcement around people carrying guns in prohibited locations?
No, there's no particular area that they're occurring in more than another. If we kind of did a heat map of all the gun crimes within the state, you would see them very sporadic throughout the entire state. It's just kind of typically where your gun crimes or where your other crimes may occur as well. Especially when you're talking about handgun and vehicle type investigations and cases. They're traveling through the roadways of the state of Maryland, so they really occur on interstates, on side roads, on county roads and so forth. So there's no particular hot area for that.
I have a question quickly. I thought I saw on the statewide chart that there were 1,600 arrests for handgun and vehicle in 2024. Do you know what the numbers were in 2023 and 2022? And could you get back to me?
For 2023, it was 1,800 for handgun and vehicle and 1,358 for handgun on persons in 2023.
Okay. All right. Further questions? One more. Yes, Delegate Conway.
Thank you,
and then
Mr.
we're going to
Chairman.
move
Thank
on.
you, sir. Again, so how do you determine if the handgun is in a vehicle? Does a person, if they're disqualified, does their license plate register by a reader, or it's just the law enforcement, they were able to determine that someone had that in a vehicle?
Correct. It would be that officer conducted that traffic stop, and somehow through their course, and it happens many different ways, that they were able to locate a firearm within that vehicle.
But you
There's
don't
a
have the
multitude
reader
of different ways.
technology at this time?
No, there's nothing that we can, that we have, at least for the Maryland State Police, that says that that person has a handgun or anything like that as far as a reader.
Thank you very much.
Why don't we move on? We'll move down to the captain, and we'll get to the second PowerPoint presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having us back again. It's hard to believe it was 2 years ago that we did this first presentation. So
Seems like a minute.
it does. It goes by quickly. So again, thank you for giving us time to provide an update. It's going to be a very similar slideshow as it was last time. I will do my best to move through slowly, and as the detective sergeant said, at a moment you want to go back to a previous slide, I'd be happy to do that and answer any questions at the end. So we'll go ahead and begin with the slideshow. I'm not going to read the entire paragraph, but this is our mission and goals of all the applications that the licensing division processes, and under the statutory authority, what we process those under. Next slide. That's the rank structure for our executive command staff. Myself, the lieutenant, 3 first sergeants overseeing all the different sections. We have approximately 36 sworn and 91 civilian personnel and counting. Legislative mandates, the top 3 within licensing division are our firearms registration, the 77R, the application to purchase a firearm/transfer, the handgun qualification license, which is the license to purchase a firearm, and the wear and carry handgun permit. You'll see the dates that we're required to have a decision rendered in: 7 days, 30 days, and 90 days. All of these stats are effective as of January 1 of this year. Going into the first slide of the data, the historical data, this is the 77R, the firearms registration application. As you can see, for 2020, 2021, 22, 23, and 24, we remained relatively consistent of about 100,000 applications that we have received. Prior to 2020, we generally saw about 45 to 55,000 applications. When we were in here 2 years ago, we focused in on the spike of 22 and those years leading up to it. As you can see on firearms registration side, the purchase and transfer of a firearm has remained relatively the same for about 4 years now. We have no reason to believe that moving forward. I anticipate, based on current trends, that the 100,000 range will probably remain in effect. The wear and carry permit application. As you can see on this, 2020, 21, and 22, 20 and 21 are before Bruin decision, 22 and thereafter is post Bruin decision. June 23rd, 2022 is when the decision was rendered. The numbers that you see for 2022, I know there's a lot of numbers I'm saying, I apologize. The 90% of the applications we received in that calendar year were July 1st and beyond. Where we are seeing now is the trend, there has been a drop off of applications in the last, I'd say about 12 months. We remain right now around 200,000 active permits, and we'll hit a slide of those actual numbers next. Here's a slide that we focused in on a couple years ago. The total Maryland wear and carry permits is a little over 200,000. That fluctuates by about 100 or so every calendar day. The vast majority of, you can see, our permits are on the left-hand side, followed by the far right-hand column is our out-of-state permits. So I'll leave that on the screen for just a few seconds, and then we could certainly come back to it. The handgun qualification license, the HQL, again, this is the license to purchase a firearm before you can, the license to purchase before you can actually do the 77R. 2020 and thereon, you can see the numbers speak for themselves. What new reporting data point to provide the committee this year is that we have the renewal period of the HQL. The Firearm Safety Act of 2013 passed. Those licenses were good for 10 years. Starting October 1st of 2023 is when the renewal period started for HQLs. And as you can see, they're slowly trickling in. Understand this, that the actual permits, the licenses issued for HQL in 2020 or in 2013, they weren't that many at that moment. So they're starting to ramp up now as we move forward. This is, we focus in on the first three, the biggest three that we have when it comes to process, but we still have lots of other licenses. And so we wanted to put on there on the couple last slides here of security guard, agencies, private detective, private agencies, dual agencies, and then the next slide as well. This is obviously shared with the committee and you have a copy of it. But these are all the other licenses that we're also doing as well. And of course, January 1 of this year, we're bringing on security guard employers and all of the security guards that work for that new classification that starts this year. So that ends all of our slides to be as quick as we can. I'm open to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all very much for the excellent presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go back to a couple of the different slides. And the one dealing just with the permits before you got to the wear carry. Can you go back to that slide? Yeah, that one. So it looks like there's about a 5% denial rate.
Okay, for this slide we're looking at
For this
now?
slide, yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Is that about 5% or so?
I don't have the percentage in front of me, but our denial rates for this is for purchases.
Yeah.
Have remained about the same consistently year over year.
What's the reason why people are denied the permit generally? Maybe even less, maybe like 2%.
Prohibitors.
0.5%, because.
So there's a variety of denials. I mean, criminal prohibitors are just a main one. You have all of the prohibitors by state or local federal laws. Just because an individual applies for a purchase, they sometimes think that if there's a process that's gone through, that they feel that they're still entitled to it and they had a previous criminal arrest, they can still apply and ultimately we make a determination. But the majority of them are just criminal prohibitors. Mental health issues, you could have all kinds of factors. Any of the 25 plus databases we check, if we come across something that denies them, that we take appropriate action.
Thank you. And going on to the next slide, which was the wear carry and the Bruin. This is the Bruin picture. So obviously there's a drop-off trend. Are you expecting that to continue?
It's hard to predict what the future holds, but it's safe to say the individuals that initially applied and have already been approved post-Bruin decision in the beginning 2+ years ago now have applied. Now we are seeing some that are coming through that there's more prohibitors, more individuals that are disapproved because they have past that prevent them from becoming approved for a wear and carry. But I believe that we're now at a maintenance level of individuals who have already done that, or if we have new residents moving into the state. But it's still hard to predict what the future is going to be 5 years from now. But we've maintained our 200,000 status now for many months.
Okay, great. And then it's actually the next slide, but it's the same issue. So they're out of state. It looks like it's about 18,000. Is there any concerns that these out-of-state applications, do you have any additional issues with out-of-state applications, or is it the same as in-state applications?
I have nothing to really, I mean, there's no in-state requirement for a wear and carry permit. We have no data point to show that there's any more concern for an out-of-state permit holder versus in-state.
Okay, and then the final question is, this is the next slide, as the renewals are going up, the new are coming down. Are we going to see eventually, do you think we're going to see that basically you're going to have mostly renewals and very few new qualification licenses? Or you don't know?
I don't know if I have that answer, because there was a trend, as you can see, there was a pretty good drop off from 20 to 21. But then we've also seen in recent months an uptick in HQL original applications. So when you think you have a pattern, something happens and then the pattern goes away.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, suddenly, lots of questions, going with Delegate Grammer, then the Vice Chair, then Delegate Sample Hughes, and Delegate Phillips. Delegate Grammer.
And, Happy New Year. It's good to see everybody. When you last came to meet with us, it was pretty close to when Bruin had come down. And there was a lot of discussion, a lot of public statements about concerns for public safety, threats of gun violence. And I asked at that time, was the increase that we were seeing in the number of people who were carrying firearms legally in the state of Maryland because of Bruin, was that contributing to any kind of new public safety threats? And at that time, the simple answer you gave was no. And I just wanted to revisit that point. We have a significantly higher number of folks carrying firearms legally in Maryland. And I don't want to, you could give whatever answer you found to be true, but could you articulate about that a little bit?
I don't have really much to provide on that. I'm not quite sure, remembering back to the last testimony and reviewing the last one. I have not, and we have not received or seen any particular spike that I could pinpoint with accuracy of a trend or give a data point of an increase of individuals that are approved with wear and carry that have been arrested. But I can say this, that an individual having a wear and carry permit may have, and an arrest may have nothing to do with the wear and carry permit.
Right.
You could be involved in an incident outside of having a firearm with you, but you happen to have a wear and carry permit. So we track obviously permit holders who are arrested. I have not identified and seen a particular spike in increase of permit holders arrested, but I know that working hand in hand with the gun center and their tracking capabilities and enhancements that we're trying to make in the future to provide more data points on that, we are certainly working towards it. But I have not seen anything or able to report here any specific thing. I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but it's a very complicated situation that we're dealing with. But we have increased permit holders that are arrested, but nothing that outside of the proportional amount of 30,000 permit holders July 1 of 2022 to 200,000+ now.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair.
Chair, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for this presentation. I have just two quick questions. One is with respect to out-of-state applications. Are the requirements, I said I only had two, so I have to make this a compound question because Already. So are the requirements and prohibitions the same, and is there a residency requirement baked in with respect to an out-of-state application?
So in regards to the wear and carry permit?
Yes.
So there's no in-state requirement, and the requirements for in-state and out-of-state are exactly the same.
Okay. That led to another question, which I won't ask now, I'll ask offline. Well, no, because I can continue sometime with this, and I have contacts with MSP, I can get more information. So with respect to the renewal data, I saw that we don't have it available prior to 2023. Is that because of statutory requirements?
Renewal for which?
I'm sorry, HQL.
Oh, for HQ, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It wasn't required yet, so 10 years had not gone by yet.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you. Thank you so much.
To add on to that question, though, very quickly before going to Delegate Sample Hughes, on the screen with regard to and I believe Holly's actually was going to help me out, and so I'm going a little too fast, on the wear carry permits and the number of renewals that were there. So I see that number going up. Is that reflecting the fact that people are renewing from that initial 2022, that increase? That's what we're starting to see in the number of renewals that are coming through. Okay. 3 years, right. Okay. Delegate Sample Hughes, then Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you today for being here on Law Enforcement Day. So thank you all for your service. The data that you just shared regards the timing for the licensing part of that's much lower than the statutory required days, I think is excellent. One in part is because I don't have any constituents calling me complaining. They're all excited about that the timing of their applications and renewals is, in a timely manner, so I appreciate you for that. My question, though, is not so much on the licensing part as one that I meant to ask you a while ago regarding the gun center. Do you decipher out in juveniles that are arrested for the handguns in the vehicles and the handguns on person? Or is it all that information lumped together, period?
All of that information is lumped together. We currently don't have a mechanism to be able to distinguish between the ages on those charges. But I can look into that a little bit further and get back to you.
Yeah, if you would, I would greatly
But
appreciate
the numbers that are on the slide, they're all encompassing of all ages that are arrested for in those particular areas.
Sure. Do you think that is something worth working on, though? I mean, even if you don't have that information, but just being we are heavily focused on juvenile crime and looking at all types of ways of reducing the interest in areas there, but a lot of them are involving handguns, and I was just curious how that data might be beneficial to further actions that we might take.
I can definitely look into it and do a follow-up with you with any information we are able to provide on that.
Sure. Thank you kindly. That's all, Mr. Chair.
To follow on upon that, I think that there would be some information you'd be able to provide that reflected a charge against a juvenile who was charged as an adult. So a 16 and 17-year-old, you might be able to, I don't know. I feel like I'm speculating when I should be asking a question, so I'm going to violate my own rule a little bit. But I think there is a question as to whether they could release all information with regard to specifically juveniles. I don't know. I would be also interested in finding out more information about juveniles who are charged with a handgun violation. And whether that
I don't
could
see an
get
issue that
broken down.
we wouldn't be able to provide that. I just don't know, have that information and data off the top
I
of my head
understand
today.
that. Absolutely. Delegate Phillips.
Good afternoon, and thank you all very much for being here today. I'm just looking at the wear and carry permit applications chart, and I know we're saying that we're meeting the requirement for approving permits, but I'm just trying to understand. So in 2023 and 2024, we had significantly more approved than those were submitted, which means I think those were carryovers from the previous year.
That is correct. I mean, there's a time where received towards the end of one calendar year, you may not have an answer. Very well won't have an answer till the following calendar year. So there's always going to be an influx and a carryover from year to year.
All right, so after 22, which was the big influx, gradually over time, we've been kind of catching up. Those numbers are coming down, is that?
Well, actually, let me go back to, maybe I'm not quite fully understanding your question.
So in 2022, there were submitted original applications was at about 101,000, right?
Right, yes, sir.
Then we moved to 23, but only 81,000 were approved. The next year, 64 were submitted, but 74,000 were approved.
That's correct.
Right, so.
That is correct. So the end of, understand that 90,000, I think there was like 91,000 were post-January 1, 2022. So and at one point, we were getting about 1,500 to 2,000 per calendar day. So much of that backed up to the end of 22. So you're not getting decisions rendered or approvals or some type of status update until early 23.
So about how long is it taking?
To process one?
To process?
The originals are around 50 days, renewals around 30 days, give or take, and that fluctuates day to day.
Okay, and then on the next slide, I had a question. I represent Baltimore County.
Yes, sir.
Is there any logic behind, as we see this, when I apply for a license to carry, there are various reasons I say I need to carry, right? Do we know what the statistics are behind that and why I'm at 30,000 wear and carry permits in my county?
I don't have any additional thoughts on that or any additional information. Every application is treated exactly the same. The reasoning for each question reason for it varies. And I don't capture or focus in on that particular component of it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Delegate Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying to understand, trying to remember with the out-of-staters, are these folks who live maybe live in Pennsylvania but spend maybe they work and so they spend most of their days in Maryland, or is this, I'm trying to remember the state. There's some state out west, and I can't remember which one, where I think it's a lot of people are attracted to getting a wear and carry out there, even if they're like never out there. Is this, are the out-of-staters, is it more of like the example one I gave, people who live in a, border state, or are these just like, people, somebody out in, I don't know, California who likes, collecting wear and carries?
So,
permits?
I mean, the thing is that there's a variety of reasons, and I'm not prepared to give, nor did I look at the data specifically for the out-of-states and which states were represented. But from my experience, it tells me there's, some in the DMV area that have homes here, work here, across state lines all the time. And there's probably a variety of other reasons. What we can control is that when an application comes in, to make sure that it meets all the legislative requirements, all of the legal requirements, understanding that there's also some of those other states you may be thinking of or referencing that individuals get that are from out of different states to get a carry permit in another jurisdiction. There's still some in-person requirements and or at least some training requirements that need to be accomplished in a way that's relatively close, although it's not required to be administered in the state of Maryland, and also live scan fingerprinting requirements. So there's some difficulties that would be done if you're very, very far away. So but at the end of it, if an application comes in, it's going to be treated exactly the same as the other ones. And if they meet the requirements, then that the answer would be, approved, assuming that there would be nothing else to it.
Okay, thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, panel, for coming in today. My question reverts back to your mission statement, or mission and goal statement page. At the very bottom where you discuss handgun permits and Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act certifications, or LEOSA, is that specific to the state police, or do you have a role in that certification for allied agencies in the state? Or is there any role with that for LEOSA with MSP?
Yeah, great question. So for LEOSA, that's independently done for each agency. For what we administer is our own Maryland State Police and Fire Marshal offices.
I have a few questions, Mr. Chair. Is that okay? So, and you may not have this statistic-wise, for MSP, do you see that a lot of individuals, retired law enforcement for the state police, have both a handgun permit and also will carry the LEOSA certification? Do you see that, or have any way of giving any type of a percentage of how often that occurs?
I'm not prepared to give a percentage, but I do know that there are some that have both.
That have both. My question for, had them all in order here. Bear with me 1 second. Was for the breakdown by occupation. You had detectives, I believe private security and such. Do you have any way of giving us statistics on how many retired law enforcement in good standing have a handgun permit in the state of Maryland? Is that possible to extrapolate that data?
You're saying how many retired law enforcement officers have a handgun permit?
Yes. Are you able to classify that?
I don't believe we'd be able to provide that information because I believe what you're asking, we can give data on how many permits there are and break down by jurisdiction and things, but I can't identify individuals who have wear and carry permits.
Or just under that classification?
I will take that note and see what we can do to provide the committee that information. I don't have that in front of me right now.
Okay. And the last question I have is for notification. I believe that was one of the delegates' questions earlier. At what point do your databases interface where if I have a handgun permit and I'll use a violation of an ex parte or something like that, or a protective order, would you become notified that that offense occurred? So would that be upon an arrest, for example, or would that be upon a conviction? Or at what point would the licensing division be aware of a situation occurred where a permit holder has been arrested or charged with a crime that could be a prohibiting crime?
Right, so there's lots of ways licensing could be notified of an individual permit holder who is arrested. Forgive me, I don't want to miss any of them, but we'll use the basics. So during the live scan fingerprinting process, when you're applying for a wear and carry, that's one component of the response that come back from fingerprints for physical arrests. So if an individual is physically arrested in the state of Maryland, we are notified of that arrest. We get that data on a daily basis.
Okay.
And we look at that and determine, is it a prohibiting offense? Is there action that we need to take? There's also other components, if you'd like for me to continue with other notification processes, or?
Maybe not all of them. My point is, I'm trying to figure out if you have a handgun permit and you were just reissued or issued one, and something transpired from there to your renewal 3 years later, if something happened in the first month, would you be notified prior to, a year later, or how much real time or such like that?
Yes, to say, the first one I listed is
A non-view arrest.
Right.
You would know on a non-view arrest.
Right, so the first one I listed is a major factor. The gun center, if an individual, a law enforcement agency responds to an incident involving a firearm, is contacting the gun center more often than not, we work hand in hand, so that notification would come to us. We also have daily conviction data that's come to us on a daily basis. We also have daily conviction data. We have the fingerprints that come back. We have the gun center who identify us, and we also implemented October 1 of last year record recheck process, which means the midway point of an original, which an original is good for 2 years, so at the 1 year mark, and also the midway point of a renewal period. Renewals are good for 3 years. We run an entire battery of record checks on that permit holder again. And then that gets you at least a midway point versus waiting for a renewal period.
Okay.
Also, where if an individual is served with a protective order or an ex parte or things like that, a lot of times those are reported to the gun center as well, and then that is reported to us, and we take whatever appropriate action is at the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Conaway, and Delegate Boucher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, panel, again. When during a vehicle stop, let's say you have 3 or 4 people in a car, and for good reason, the car is searched and a firearm is discovered, and no one claims the firearm, would everyone in the car likely be charged with having an illegal firearm?
Those kind of scenarios, I think, would be best to answered by the law enforcement officer conducting that traffic stop. It's hard to give a one-size-fits-all response to that.
Well, I'm from Baltimore City, and we kind of believe that that's what happens. What I was trying to get around to is if you're charged with something like that, and let's say you get a PBJ, and 10 years later you want to apply for a license, are you disqualified, or how does that work?
Well, the Justice Reinvestment Act did implement some charges that would be worthy for an expungement, and that particular scenario could be one of those eligible charges. But that goes for any type of previous criminal charge. If during the application process for wear and carry or purchase or an HQL, we come across these things all the time.
Right.
Old charges 20, 30, 40 years ago. And we work with the applicant more often than not to at least guide them down the process to if an expungement is appropriate or other things, because there's an informal process, there's an appeal process with the Office of Administrative Hearings. So we do a lot of those things. Now, at the end of it, the facts are the facts. If all of options are exhausted, we still have a decision to render at the end, and it could be a disapproval. It could be a denial. But in the meantime, there is mechanisms in place for those charges in those scenarios, but it's hard to cover every single scenario that's presented to us without actually having the application in front of us.
Thank you so very much.
Yes, sir.
Delegate Boucher, then Grammer, then Embry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for being here today with us and collecting all this data. As legislators and policy advocates, it's nice to see the data collected to determine what the impact of previous legislation was. I'm curious as to what we are to do with the data we have now based upon your understanding of this data far more than we understand it. Is there any future policy initiatives or legislation that you think would be applicable for us to put forward or maybe is going to come forward, and whether I can even ask that question?
Thank you. Asking how can you help them? Is that?
Well, I mean, if they have any initiatives, I'm wondering, we're looking at this. What should we do with this in the future with legislation that would help us? If there's flaws in what we're seeing here, that you're seeing that we don't see, what could we potentially do to make things better? I need to know, what am I going to do with this data?
That's a great question. It's hard to provide a one-size-fits-all without taking a lot of time and thought into putting into it. So forgive me if I'm not in a position right now to provide the answer that the one size.
Well, that's what I was
answer.
wondering, but sometimes there's usually a glaring flaw that your expertise sees that we don't notice.
Look, I can comment on it. I think we have a great group of men and women that work for licensing that do a great job. And I think the data shows that we're not perfect, but we're doing the best we can. And I think that if there was anything glaring, this body would be able to pick up on it. I really can't go much further than that.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to figure out what we can do to help you. If there's anything in the future, please
Continued
come
support.
forward.
That.
Thank you.
Captain gets the award for the most judicious answer of the year so far. And we're going to go to Delegates Grabber, then Embry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question following Delegate Conway's question. So I visited, along with several other delegates, we visited Hickey over the interim. And as you know, in a juvenile center, you have juveniles that are arrested and charged as juveniles, and you have juveniles that are arrested and charged as adults. And we talked with the leadership there, and they pointed out the charges for which many of the juveniles who were held for, as juveniles or adults were detained. And they said more than half of the juveniles who were charged as adults are there for one specific charge. That charge was illegal possession of a handgun. And I said, well, how does that happen? And they said, well, if one juvenile has a gun illegally, they all get charged with it. And that was Delegate Conway's question. Is it true or is it not true that if someone has a gun in a car or about them, everybody can get arrested? And I'm looking at 4203, and it says, except as provided in subsection B of the section, a person may not wear, carry, or transport a handgun, whether concealed, open, on, or about the person. So I just wanted to clarify why we're here talking about illegal gun possession. Isn't it correct that even though a person is not actually in possession, even though someone else may be possessing the gun, there could be several people that are about the gun who can also be arrested for that possession?
So general, yes. I mean, there is a criminal offense in order to carry a firearm outside of your home that is not articulated in law, going to a range, going to a firearms dealer, a trade show, one of the articulated exceptions to carrying without a permit, then yes, it is illegal to carry that firearm. So sorry if I didn't understand your question originally, then yes, there could be a criminal charge there. But when it comes to the application of that charge, I would say that it's deferred to that local jurisdiction and that state's attorney and that law enforcement officer conducting that investigation at the time to determine if it's appropriate or how it's applied.
Right. And I just wanted to point out that particular point because this has been an issue with the Gun Trace Task Force. They would knowingly arrest everybody. The Maryland Supreme Court has actually ruled on those two words, or about, but that is something that does happen. And there's the case that someone is in illegal possession and multiple people get arrested, even though those other people don't have anything to do with a gun. But I do appreciate the answer.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for being here. I just want to make sure I'm understanding in the gun center slides, the case types. Is that something that local law enforcement selects which case type they're reaching out on, or do you assign a case type?
We assign a case type depending on what service we're providing them and what incident or scenario that they have in front of them at the time. So, in a case of a handgun on a vehicle, handgun on a person, that is typically a lot easier. And that's why the firearm used in the commission of a crime, that covers even more of a broader area of that. But so one of the things that we do when we speak to the arresting officer or investigating officer, we get them to tell us a little bit of the brief scenario on how they came in contact with the gun, where the gun was loaded, if CDS was involved and so forth. And then the investigator itself, we break down to what the actual underlining category is for our purpose.
And then can you, for police investigation, search warrant, and firearm investigation, how do those differ? How would you decide?
So a search warrant would be that a department actually executed a search and seizure warrant.
The gun was recovered.
And yes, a firearm was located in that residence of some sort of fashion. A police investigation could be it's a whole wide variety of things that could occur. It could be a social media investigation where they may see somebody posing with guns, just a whole, as you can imagine, just all kind of different things. And then a firearm investigation is typically, we have this firearm with, that we have identified, and then they're contacting us to see if we can provide some more information on that of whether that's going to be lost, stolen, a registration, conduct an ATF e-trace on it to provide additional information for that particular firearm.
That's really helpful. So the ultimate charge may not, yeah, I mean, what ultimately happens in the case may differ from how it initially came in. Is that fair to
Absolutely.
say? Okay, no, I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Delegate Crutchfield. I think we're going to wrap up. Delegate Crutchfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for being here as well. Appreciate the information. I guess I'm just a little curious because the gun center information you provided really wasn't broken down with demographic information. I'm looking for race, gender, et cetera. Is that captured anywhere? I'm assuming it's captured. First of all, let's go with the gun center. So the services that you provide, I would assume that somewhere that information is captured.
Correct.
Okay. And is it possible for you to provide that to us at some point?
Yes, I don't believe there should be an issue. Is there any particular area that you're looking for one way or another? Or
Okay. And then maybe even captured by county as well would be great, just to see where we are demographically, gender, race, age, whatever you may have.
I can certainly get that information and provide it to the committee.
Okay. And then the other part is on the licensing piece. The same thing. I mean, I'm assuming on applications now, again, I apologize because I've never filed an application, but I'm assuming that information is there. Occupation, race, age is somewhere. Do you have the ability to manipulate that information and give it to us? I'm sorry, I'm still
Yes,
have
we
a
do
cold.
capture. We actually provide it to the JCR reporting. So we're already reporting it to the legislative body as we speak now as a requirement.
Okay.
So that information is already provided to the Joint Committee's report.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for coming and presenting today. I have to say I made a mistake at the very beginning because Colonel Butler has been sitting there the entire time, and I failed to recognize that he was in the room. But we want to thank the Secretary of the State Police for also being here today and for providing really a great presentation that I think has been very helpful for members of the committee. So we may ask you to come back again if you want. I mean, hopefully you will. But we really do appreciate you coming in and spending some time with us today. Thank you very much. All right, with that, that concludes this briefing. We thank you all, and we will be back next Tuesday with briefings in front of the committee. Thank you again.